Welcome to the Politics of Everything. I'm Amber Daines, your host and podcast producer. This is a half hour of power, a podcast dropping every week where I unpack the politics of everything, from money to motherhood, nutrition to narcissism, startups to secularism, the environment, equality, and much, much more. Our guests are seasoned in the field or topic of their choice, even if you've not heard of them yet. This is a non-partisan show. So while I love exploring varied views and get a buzz from a healthy debate of ideas, this is not a purely blue, white, green program. Please subscribe, tune in and enjoy the politics of everything. This episode mentions mental health conditions and may not be suitable for all. Jacinta Dietrich is a neurodivergent and bisexual writer, editor and podcaster based in Melbourne in Australia. She's an autistic ADHDer with chronic fatigue syndrome and a family history of suicidality, depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Jacinta uses her lived experience and family history to advocate for a better understanding of neurodivergence and mental health in a variety of communities and industries. She is the founder and producer and co-host of Differently Brained, an Own Voices podcast where each fortnight she interviews a neurodivergent guest or a guest who experienced mental health challenges to encourage people to share their own stories and champion the different ways we all exist in the world. This particular podcast is featured on Apple Podcasts as an emerging podcast to watch and regularly charts in the Australian health and fitness and mental health categories. A seasoned and accomplished writer and spokesperson, Jacinta is passionate about disability representation across multiple communities and industries and is committed to breaking down the stigmas, stereotypes and misconceptions. And I warmly welcome her to the Politics of Everything.
Thank you so much for having me.
Podcasting remotely can be challenging, but it doesn't have to be. Since day one of the Politics of Everything, I have relied on Zencastr's all-in-one solution to make the process quick and painless, the way it should be for those of us who just love great content and want to get our ideas out into the world. If you know me, I'm obsessed with quality in terms of my guests, my sound, and everything about my show has to be great the first time. I'm time poor. It's so easy to use Zencastr. I'm not tech savvy and you don't need to be either. There's nothing to download. Just click on the link and off we go. Zencastr is all about making your podcasting experience easy, and with everything from local recording to automatic post-productions now in their toolkit, you don't have to leave your browser to get that episode done, and done fast. I have a special offer for you, and hopefully you can experience what I have with Zencastr. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my VIP code, the Politics of Everything, all lowercase and one word, to get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. How good is that? I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. This is exciting. I saw your profile and I thought, wow, in the 6.5 years I've been doing this, we've never had anyone pitch this topic. So well done you. I get a lot of people pitching the same stuff. So I am keen to dive into this. However, my first question I ask all my guests is, do you remember what you thought you might want to do when you were a bit younger, as a kid maybe, and kind of your early job or career story?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always loved reading. So I was a big book girl just from like very early on. Mum said, I would just sit in the corner and read books. And then, all through primary school and high school, I did that. And I really loved writing short stories as well. So I loved English and, those kind of classes and things. And so when I was really, really little, I thought, oh, well, I'll write books. That'll be my job. And then as I got a bit older, into high school, I realized that, that's not always the most financially stable career, and that I just had absolutely no idea how you do it. And so the main thing that I feel like was kind of constantly suggested is, oh, well, you love English, be an English teacher. So for a really long time, all through high school, I just assumed I would probably be an English teacher. And then it wasn't until basically the end of high school, when everyone was doing compulsory English but all their other electives, did I realize that I would be absolutely heartbroken if I had to come in every day and teach a bunch of students who potentially didn't want to be there. So,
oh, well, that's definitely a challenge. Makes it a bit
yes.
harder.
So that went out the window, and then I started looking at publishing and editing and, the kind of production behind the scenes side of books. So I always knew that I was going to do something around reading, writing, and English and things like that, but it has changed over time.
Oh, definitely. The industry is completely disrupted since perhaps, you were thinking initially that, you'd get into that. There's so many self-publishing options and, different aspects to that career path, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so many different options now. And just teaching people who weren't passionate about it, I'm just too sensitive. I couldn't have done it. So it's probably good that I discovered that. And now I'm a bit of a slashy, I guess. So I'm a freelance writer, freelance editor, and podcaster. So
well, that's great. I love hearing people's backstories because it just joins the dots before we get into our topic today. Can you just define for us what it means to be neurodiverse, which of course is the focus of this episode? How would you unpack it rather than just going into Wikipedia? What's your sort of working definition of it?
I want to preface this by fully saying I don't have a psychology background. I don't know much beyond my lived experience and things like that. But for me, my understanding of neurodiversity is that everybody is neurodiverse in that we all have differently wired brains and things like that. But to be neurodivergent is to have, one of the labels, identities, whatever word individuals prefer. Sorry, I just fully lost my train of thought.
No, I think it's just for people to understand. I think there's a lot of, myths, as you say, and stigmas around neurodiversity. It obviously comes with, more than one, if you like, label. So is it about being wired differently in your brain? How would you really kind of, I guess, streamline it for people?
I think it's about being wired differently. Just my brain just works differently to what is presented as the standard neurotypical experience. So in the same way that, if you applied it to a different lens, like queerness or something, I guess, is maybe the best analogy is, the way that, we have heterosexual and cisgendered people would be kind of the neurotypical equivalent. And then, you've got your ADHDs and your autistics and your bipolar and things like that. And that's your LGBTQIA plus kind of thing.
Yeah, so that makes sense. I really like that. That's probably the best explanation I've heard. So there you go. When you go into the textbook definitions, I think people, if you haven't had that experience or you're not neurodiverse, it can be a little bit confusing and you won't have that same degree of knowledge, if that makes sense, because it's not your own experience. So how do people know if they're neurodiverse? And I guess it taps into that idea of cliches. People often, I've got 2 children and when they were being tested for various things, it's like, they make lots of eye contact, so they can't possibly be on the spectrum. Or, the academic side of things sometimes is like, they're really gifted, but they've got autism. And so there's kind of things that people package together, which might be helpful indicators, but perhaps, a lot of people might not be so, if not binary, sold on any of those characteristics. They might be somewhere in the middle of all of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I like to think of it, so, the word spectrum is used quite a bit. And I think when you think of a spectrum, everyone kind of imagines a line from less autistic to more autistic kind of thing. But for me, it's a pie chart. So there are different parts of being neurodivergent that I personally will be more challenged by or will be really, really effective for me. And it's more of the social side of things might be a little bit harder for me than the executive dysfunction side of things, or vice versa, rather than a swinging slider, I guess.
I like a pie chart. That's a good visual. I think that's good. Yeah.
And it just made it much easier for me to break down. It's so hard to know. I think it's kind of 2 things that are really impacting, neurodivergent representation and people's understanding. And the diagnostic criteria is incredibly outdated. It focuses on those cliches, like they are cliches and stereotypes for a reason. And it's because the majority of the research up until, very recently and kind of still continues to be focuses on one section of the population and their experiences of being neurodivergent and things like that. So then the diagnostic criteria only kind of checks off those things and misses a whole bunch of
other things, I think. Yeah, like it's probably far more, detailed in some ways than maybe traditionally been looked at. And of course, you've got your own experience and you're navigating the world, and obviously you have a range of, career paths that you've taken, and you're a slashy, as you put it, but obviously you're still in some ways defined by some of your conditions, like you've mentioned, which in the bio, which I read out, you're an autistic ADHDer with chronic fatigue syndrome. That sounds like a lot to me. So can you just share for us, I guess, for you, what some of those challenges have been as you've kind of navigated life, and perhaps there's probably some superhero secret powers in there, which I don't have, unfortunately. I don't have a lot of hyperfocus, so there you go.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like to kind of see it as, for me, the ADHD and the autism is kind of a Venn diagram. So for me, when I started looking into it and things like that, I thought, okay, I could be autistic. And I went to my psychiatrist.
And what were you doing, me asking? Were you a child or an adult?
No, I was an adult. I was 27, so it was only a few years ago. And I think such a big part of that was because not only, like I said before, the clinical stuff is so outdated, so nobody would have noticed it from that side, but also representation just didn't exist. And it's still like relatively rare, and authentic, good representation is so hard to find that I didn't realize that I was neurodivergent because I hadn't seen other people with my experience. I hadn't read books, I hadn't watched movies, I hadn't seen anything that really fit with my experience of the world. And so I got a bunch of different labels instead. I was weird, I was shy, I was standoffish, I was lazy, I was unfocused, I was, really good at this thing but didn't meet my potential in other things. I was a chatterbox, I was dramatic, all of these things, because I didn't know that the way that I see the world, the way that I engage with the world, was different to what felt like the majority of my peers in school. So it wasn't until I started to see more of those representations on social media and, in the novels I was reading, and obviously with amazing advocates and media personalities like Chloe Hayden, Grace Tame, Abby Chatfield, people like that, I just had no idea what I was looking for, kind of thing. So yeah, it was a relatively late diagnosis generally, but that's kind of more common now for...
I think it is. I think more people talk about that than, maybe being diagnosed as a child. And like you say, maybe the testing criteria needs to, keep evolving, really, to help people.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I went to my psychiatrist and she sent me home with a bunch of homework. So I got a bunch of the autistic screening tools, but then she also flagged a bunch of ADHD screening tools, which I'd only been looking into autism and the representation there and trying to read other people's experiences. I hadn't even considered ADHD and things like that. But once we got all of the screening, like all the quizzes and stuff back, and I promise I'm going to answer the question, it's just such a long way of doing it. For me, the autism and the ADHD are a pretty tight Venn diagram.
Okay. So they're interlinked at a really acute level in some ways, if you like. Like you feel it's part of... Absolutely, yeah. Part of who you are, and that's it. There's nothing we can change.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to, I'm never going to be able to pinpoint this part of my behavior is exclusively autistic and this one's ADHD. There are some
commonalities, I imagine. Yeah, I think there'd be crossovers. I can see that anyway in people I know that have either one of those conditions, if you like. Yeah.
Absolutely. And like, that's not to say they don't butt heads every once in a while. You know, the ADHD loves the novelty while the autism loves the routine. And so that can be a little difficult to navigate my day to day of, you know, I can do all of the great planning on a Sunday night. And then, you know, by Monday morning, the ADHD part is like, nah, we're not going to do it like that. We're going to do these 50 other jobs, which are probably still important, but I liken it to I've got a main quest to do, but my brain always wants to do the side quest.
Yeah,
So
that's really great. And I guess, but there's got to be advantages. I mean, there's got to be things where you think you've tapped into something because you understand yourself and your makeup that's allowed you to maybe be more creative or to see the world differently or tap into stuff that's not so, mainstream, if you like. Do you feel like that, or do you feel like it's still just more about the challenges and that sort of side of things?
no, I definitely love it. Obviously there are challenges and things like that, but I do, and I think this is part of why it was probably nice to come with a late diagnosis, I guess. I've reflected a lot on the difference between if I had been diagnosed earlier or later. And I think being an adult now and being in a society where we are getting a better understanding and things like that, I'm able to look at it from a strengths-based approach, and I'm able to realize that I have excellent attention to detail and pattern recognition. So I will notice things that maybe other people won't. And it means that, especially in my writing or my editorial work, I'm really able to knuckle into those and, figure out plot holes or see how something would play out before I've drafted it and things like that, and kind of skip that middle iffy part. And, I will always love a hyper focus. I understand that it can be disruptive and it can take over your day, and maybe it's not always the most convenient thing, but it's one of my favorite feelings is just the amount of excitement and joy and happiness that I get from, finding a new topic of interest or finding a new craft or a hobby or finding a new, fantasy world that I've imagined that I'm writing about and just fully sinking into it, because I can just get so immersed and it feels so special that my brain can give me that experience where, if the option was that, you take it all away and in return, I'm good at doing dishes and house cleaning and all the executive dysfunction tasks I'm not great at, but I don't have that, I wouldn't change it at all.
Absolutely. So with your sort of diagnosis, that obviously came quite late, there seems to be a little bit of an uptick, if you like, in adults who are talking, and I'm thinking high-profile people like Amelia Freeman, for example, who talk about the fact they got late diagnosis on ADHD or other people on autism spectrum. Do you think awareness has helped fuel that, or is it just about people, who perhaps are asking the right questions because they have base challenges? I know for someone like Mia, when she's talked about it, she felt not embarrassed is not the quite word, but her words were, excuse my French, I feel like such a basic bitch joining this ADHD party because everyone's got it now. I feel like I was reluctant to tell people because it feels like a bandwagon. So she'd sort of identified that. Not everyone's going to view it like that, but I feel like there's a greater awareness now, and perhaps that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that the awareness is definitely increasing, and I think it's the understanding. I think it's a better awareness of the whole experience as opposed to one sliver of the experience or one person's experience kind of thing. I definitely relate to the, basic bitch situation where, I've had my diagnosis for a few years now, and I did manage to get in before COVID, which I was really, really grateful for, because I know that, accessing
those services were very difficult because obviously we're in lockdown and then, nothing really happened, right? Like people just waited. Yeah.
But I think I think it's a few different things that have led to it, where it's better awareness and better representation, where we have so many more people talking about it publicly. We've got so many more people in the media and advocates who are sharing their experience. I think we're getting a better understanding of how different neurodivergence can look for different people. And so, slowly but surely the diagnostic criteria and the understanding in the medical world is getting better. And I think also part of it is that we all had a lot of time to reflect during COVID.
That's true.
We were all
introspective in a way,
media.
right? We were just a bit more, we were forced to be introspective, really, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think that, there was obviously that moment, but then I think a lot of the neurodivergent community has always had a really strong presence online because that is, we've built safe communities there and little pockets of the internet. And I think to maintain that kind of sense of community, people did take to social media and they did start sharing their experiences, which meant that, when people were doom scrolling, you were more likely to just come across it and then start piecing things together and then, have that self-reflection and introspective time to start thinking about like, oh, that's how my brain works. Oh, so
yeah,
I think it was
to that. So I think that's a powerful thing, and I can't see any disadvantage to that, really.
No, I think, it's been a real flow-on effect of just a bunch of positive changes that, as much as, there will be people who flog the it's getting overdiagnosed and overprescribed kind of rhetoric and things like that. I don't think it's true. I don't agree. I think it's not that we're overdiagnosed or anything like that. It's just that we haven't been recognized until now. It's not like some forms of physical disability where it's very visible. And so it sometimes feels like unless you are neurodivergent and you can kind of your community, no one knows unless you tell them kind of thing.
Yeah,
especially if they don't have an awareness around the topic or the language and things like that, because then, they are more likely to assume that you are all of those labels that I listed earlier. You're weird, you're a bit different, you're shy, you're
socially awkward, all those kind of, I guess stereotypes really, which, might be true or may not be true in terms of how you manifest. Because I'm thinking last week I do media training and I had a corporate and they did ask me about, how do you do media training? It's such an extroverted activity with people who might be subject matter experts, but, they might not love going on TV or radio. It's not their happy space. And I was like, well, I'm sure I've trained 5,000 people in 13 years. I know that I have definitely worked with people who have, different backgrounds and experiences, and that would include that. It's about being human, really, and knowing, okay, they find this bit challenging and I have tips and I've got ways to which to work with that. But I don't think I've ever really segmented it out, if that makes sense. It's more about the individual. I can see, for example, they're struggling with eye contact and it's a TV interview. My tip is if you're sitting in a room with someone, you kind of look at their forehead and it's all filmed off camera. Nobody can tell you're not making eye contact. You still look like you're looking at the person. And so that's how I've dealt with it, for example. You know what I mean? A really simple 101 kind of way.
Yeah, and I think that's the strength of, taking a strength-based approach to neurodivergence and having neuroaffirming strategies and practitioners and things like that, because at the end of the day, we are all as unique as everyone else kind of thing. And, in the same way that not all queer people are the same, not all neurodivergent people are the same strategies, the same challenges, the same strengths aren't going to apply to all of us. And so it is a really individual situation and finding, what works for you.
Yeah, I agree. So do you think, what are some tips or ways in which, I guess, businesses can accommodate and foster a workforce where, there are neurodivergent people in there and become truly inclusive? Obviously talking about it and raising awareness is great, but action is even better. Do you have some examples?
Yes. So I haven't experienced these necessarily, but these are things that I've been, picking up along the way.
Yeah, just things you might have heard about even, not even if it's personal experience, but stuff that can maybe help, if you like.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things is when you're hiring people and things like that, straight up, you don't have to do it in the interview or early on, but when you've offered someone the job, simply asking every person that you're hiring, it should just be a normal part of the process. What accommodations, tools, or whatever do you need to be able to do this job? Because at the end of the day, you should be doing those anyway, in my opinion. If someone needs to work from home some days a week. We know that that's possible. If someone needs to fidget in the office, that's fine. Give them an office with a door or something. If someone says, I need this, that, or the other, I think it should just be a given that businesses, one, ask the question just as a normal thing. So it's normalized for every single person in our community, because neurotypical people might have access needs as well. You don't need to be neurodivergent to have access needs. So I think that's a big one, of asking the question just really simply and then actually going through and doing it, because I think that's something that really, it personally puts me off a bit. You know, if I have to go and ask, or if I have to bring the conversation up.
Yeah, it may not happen, right? You might just avoid it.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely,
kind of human instinct anyway, when something's not easy or accessible for us. So I think that's a really good approach. Changing tack a little bit, what would be your number one business tool or hack that you use that it can't be your phone, and how does it help you?
This is probably like a lame one, and I don't know if it really counts as like a business tool or a hack, but I color code absolutely everything. So I'm really, really visual, and I very much get stuck in the out of sight, out of mind situation for emails, for tasks I have to do, for this, that, and the other. Like if I can't regularly see it, I'm going to forget that it exists. So having different post-it notes of the tasks that I want to do that are color-coded to different areas of my life. So I have like pink for our podcast and things like that that are really easily identifiable visually, means that I plan a lot quicker. So I pop those down on like a corkboard and things, and if I look and I can see, okay, the majority of it's pink, I know I'm going to spend most of the week on the podcast. Or if the majority of it is blue, it means I have a lot of life admin to catch up on. And I think, you know, having that visual cue definitely works for me as an ADHDer for the memory. And then also it's just made me faster in terms of I know what I'm doing, and I know, you know, which emails I need to have open and those kind of things. So color coding is the way to go for me.
Yeah, I like that. Excellent. I think that would really help me as well in my day-to-day if I'm looking at my desk at the moment. Your biggest life lesson at the moment that you'd like to share, and why has it been so important to you?
It's gonna sound so cliche and basic, very much leaning into the basic bitch here, but I think it's literally to just be yourself. Like, I know that sounds so tacky and it's been said, but I think that's been one of the biggest game changers for me personally. And I understand that I've been very, very lucky and very, very privileged where I don't face very much stigma in my day-to-day life because I have a beautiful and accepting family. And, you know, on the street, as I said, like, I don't look disabled. I just look like a cis white woman just wandering around. And so I understand, like, you know, I don't have those barriers. So it's really, you know, big of me to say, oh, just be yourself. I think
I think you can't be anyone else. I feel very Dr. Seuss saying that. Don't worry, that's very cliche. You know, you can't. You got to be yourself because everybody else is taking kind of bumper sticker. You know, but it's true.
Yeah, I think it's been such an important part of, you know, our neurodivergent community coming together and understanding and getting role models and advocates and representation, because if those people weren't being themselves on TV and, you know, writing themselves in books and being themselves on social media, like, I could still potentially not understand my identity and still be struggling and still...
That's really important, actually. Yeah. So it's really been a game changer for you. And I think that's all you can go on, right? Like, that's worked for you and, you know, that's excellent.
I know it sounds, you know, dorky and stuff as well, and I would have cringed hearing that. But, you know, having it be something that I'm like, oh, I'm doing this for someone else. I'm doing this for a younger me, or I'm doing this for someone else in the community who needs to see someone else like them, has made it a lot easier to just lean into the things that I know I do differently, because someone's going to want to see that. And, you know, I'm not great at doing things for me, but I'm pretty good at doing things for our community. So
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And how do you define success? What does that look like for you?
This one's been something that I have been really struggling with lately, on a personal level. I have always been someone who was very into academics and getting good marks and things like that. I loved a report card. I loved the, catch-up meetings at work where you get the feedback and things like that. So I've based a lot of my self-esteem and my understanding of success around how smart, air quotes, I come across to people and how kind of high I reach in kind of a career progression. Last year I was made redundant, so everything got flipped on its head, and now I'm starting to understand success more as long as you are happy and healthy and doing what you can. It's been very much a kind of acceptance therapy situation, a very, very hardcore immersion into it, not by choice. But yeah, I think, my version of success is just being happy and doing what I can and doing what I love.
Excellent. I love that simplicity. Just a final takeaway message for us today on the politics of neurodivergence.
I think it's mostly to just listen more to neurodivergent people in general. I know that there's a lot of media at the moment about events where, I know there's in the media at the moment, the young girl who took her own life and now they're looking back at her diaries to see what the signs are, but we don't have to get to that point. We are literally right here. So many of us want to talk about our experience because it's something that we're still understanding and working through ourselves, and we know how lonely and isolating it was when we didn't know it. So I think the big thing is listen to neurodivergent people, talk to neurodivergent people, include neurodivergent people, learn what you can, because it's not of much value going back after we're gone to try and see the signs. There's a lot of us out there actively waving the flag, throwing up the banner saying, I'm happy to speak to people about my experience. I'm happy to co-design things. It's not hard to find us. So do it while we're here. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that powerful message. And of course, if you want to find out a little bit more about Jacinta or tune into her podcast, of course, there will be details on the show notes. Until next time, take care. Thanks so much for listening today. If you've enjoyed the politics of everything, I thrive on your feedback. So please add a short review and share the podcast with your network through Apple, Spotify, and all the usual suspects. I'm always on the hunt for new and diverse guests, so if you or someone you know has a fresh idea you're busting to get out there, please email me at amber@amberdanes.com and my crew will get back to you very soon.